High in the whispering mountains, nestled among peaks that kissed the clouds, lay the village of Avani. Sadia, daughter of the village elder, stood at the edge of their territory, her hand resting on the rough bark of an ancient sentinel tree. A scar, a pale line against the bronze of her cheek, spoke of a past battle where she had defended her home. Now a new threat loomed. Down in the valley, the banners of Sultan Idris rippled in the wind, a sea of crimson and gold. The Sultan's army had been encroaching for weeks, their presence like a shadow creeping across the land. Whispers of their leader, the masked Sultan Idris, filled the mountain air. They spoke of a monster, a creature of darkness hidden behind gold, who ruled with an iron fist and a heart of ice. The villagers feared him, and Sadia, though her heart beat strong, felt a chill run down her spine. A horn blared from the valley. A detachment of soldiers, their armor gleaming in the afternoon sun, began to ascend the mountain path. Sadia straightened, her gaze firm. She would not let fear paralyze her. Her people needed her. The soldiers halted a few paces away. Their leader, a stern-faced man with a grizzled beard, stepped forward. "By order of Sultan Idris," he announced, his voice echoing through the quiet mountain air, "this village is now under his protection. You will pay tribute or face the consequences." Sadia met his gaze without flinching. "Protection?" she asked, her voice clear and strong. "Your army has driven away the mountain goats. Our fields are trampled, and our people live in fear. This is not protection, this is conquest." The captain's eyes narrowed. "You dare question the Sultan's will?" "I speak for my people," Sadia replied, lifting her chin. "We are a peaceful village. We have done nothing to provoke his wrath." "The Sultan's will is absolute," the captain said, his hand resting on the hilt of his sword. "Submit or be destroyed." Sadia looked at the faces of her people, the fear in their eyes mirroring her own growing dread. She knew they could not withstand the Sultan's army. There was only one way to save them. She took a deep breath and spoke, her voice ringing. With determination, "I will go," she said. "I will become the Sultan's bride. In exchange, he will leave my village in peace." The captain stared at her, surprised by her offer. He conferred with his men, then turned back to Sadia. "Very well," he said. "Your offer will be taken to the Sultan. Await our return." As the soldiers descended the mountain path, Sadia watched them go, her heart heavy with the weight of her decision. She had offered herself to a monster to save her people. What awaited her in the mist-shrouded palace of Gazara she could only imagine. But for the sake of her village, she would face whatever darkness lay ahead. The journey to Gazara was long and shrouded in mist. The palace, perched high on a cliffside, seemed to grow out of the rock itself, a dark and imposing structure. Sadia, dressed in a simple white gown, felt a tremor of fear as she approached. The guards, clad in black armor, opened the heavy gates, and she entered a world of shadows and whispers. The wedding ceremony was a hushed affair. The courtiers, dressed in rich silks and jewels, watched her with curious eyes, their whispers like the rustling of dry leaves. Sultan Idris stood at the far end of the hall, his golden mask gleaming in the candlelight. He was a tall figure, cloaked in darkness, his presence radiating an unsettling power. Sadia felt a chill as she walked towards him, her steps echoing. In the vast, silent hall, the ceremony was short and solemn, conducted in a language Sadia did not understand. When it was over, Idris gestured for her to follow him. They walked in silence through long, dimly lit corridors, the air thick with the scent of incense, and something else, something faintly metallic, that made Sadia uneasy. He led her to a chamber bathed in the soft glow of moonstones. It was a beautiful room, filled with rich tapestries and exotic plants, but Sadia could not appreciate its beauty. Her heart pounded in her chest, fear a tight knot in her stomach. She stood before the masked sultan, her hands clasped tightly. together, waiting for him to speak, waiting for the monster to reveal itself. Idris turned to face her. He reached up, his gloved hand hovering over the golden mask. Sadia flinched, bracing herself for the horror she expected to see. But instead of a monstrous visage, the mask was lifted to reveal a face of surprising handsomeness. A single, dark scar ran from his temple to his jaw, a stark contrast against his otherwise flawless features. His eyes, the color of warm honey, met hers. "You expected a monster," he said, his voice low and surprisingly gentle. Sadia, still trembling, slightly, could only nod. "The mask," Idris continued, holding it up to the light, "allows me to move unseen, to observe my court without the burden of preconceptions. It allows me to hear the truth, unfiltered by flattery or fear." He set the mask down on a nearby table. "But with you," he said, turning back to Sadia, "I have no need for such deception." Sadia looked at him, her fear slowly receding, replaced by a cautious curiosity. This was not the monster she had expected. There was a sadness in his eyes, a loneliness that resonated with her own. "Why?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Why choose me, a simple mountain girl, to be your bride?" Idris sighed. "Your courage impressed me," he said. "Your willingness to sacrifice yourself for your people. It is a quality I admire, and one that is sorely lacking in my own court." He paused, then added, "And perhaps I hoped for someone who would see me, not the mask." Sadia met his gaze, a flicker of understanding passing between them. The silence stretched, filled with unspoken questions and a tentative hope that perhaps, just perhaps, she had not condemned herself to a life of darkness after all. Sadia awoke to the sound of birdsong, a sound she had not heard since leaving her mountain home. Sunlight streamed through the arched windows, illuminating the intricate patterns woven into the tapestries that adorned the walls. She rose and went to the window, looking out over the sprawling palace gardens. They were a maze of pathways and hidden alcoves filled with exotic flowers and lush greenery. But even in this beauty, there was a hint of danger. Sadia noticed plants with unfamiliar dark leaves and thorns that glinted in the sun. She later learned from a passing servant that many of the plants in the garden were poisonous, their beauty masking a deadly secret. The palace itself was like a labyrinth, a maze of corridors and hidden chambers. Sadia spent her days exploring its secrets, her footsteps echoing in the vast, empty halls. She discovered hidden libraries filled with ancient scrolls and secret passages that led to hidden courtyards. She felt like she was navigating a hidden world, a world of secrets and whispers, much like the Sultan's court. Idris, despite his duties, sought out Sadia whenever he could. They would meet in the palace gardens, away from the prying eyes of the court. He would tell her stories of his childhood, of growing up within the palace walls, surrounded by intrigue and deception. He spoke of his desire to rule justly, to bring peace and prosperity to his people, but he confessed to feeling trapped by the expectations and traditions of his position. Sadia, in turn, told him about her village, about the simple life she had led, about the close-knit community and the connection to the land. She spoke of the hardships they faced, the struggles to survive in the harsh mountain environment. Idris listened intently, his honey-colored eyes filled with a mixture of fascination and sadness. He seemed genuinely interested in her world, a world so different from his own. One afternoon, as they sat by a fountain in a secluded part of the garden, Idris confided in Sadia, "I wear the mask not to hide my face, but to hide my heart. It is a shield against the constant scrutiny, the endless judgments. It allows me to observe without being observed, to understand without being understood." Sadia looked at him, seeing the vulnerability beneath his carefully constructed facade. "But it also isolates you," she said softly. "It creates a barrier between you and your people." Idris sighed. "You are right," he admitted, "but I do not know how to break free from it. The mask has become a part of me, a symbol of my power, a symbol of fear." He looked out over the garden, his gaze distant. "I long for a day when I can rule without it, when I can be seen for who I am, not for what I represent." Sadia reached out and gently touched his hand. "Perhaps," she said, her voice filled with a newfound hope, "perhaps that day is not so far away." In these stolen moments, a bond began to form between them, a bond forged not in passion, but in understanding and shared vulnerability. Sadia began to see the man behind the mask, the lonely ruler who yearned for connection and justice. And Idris, in Sadia, found someone who saw him not as a monster, but as a man. But even as their connection deepened, Sadia remained wary. The whispers of the Sultan's cruelty still echoed in her ears, and the poisonous garden, with its hidden dangers, served as a constant reminder of the treacherous world she now inhabited. Sadia accompanied Idris to the weekly court session, a formal gathering held in the grand hall of the palace. Idris, masked as always, sat upon his golden throne, his presence radiating an almost palpable aura of power. The courtiers, dressed in their finery, approached him one by one, bowing low and presenting their petitions or reports. Sadia watched, a growing unease settling in her stomach. She noticed the fear in their eyes, the nervous tremors in their voices as they addressed the masked sultan. It was not the fear of a respected ruler, but the fear of a predator, of something unknown and dangerous. Later that day, as Sadia strolled through the palace gardens, she overheard two servants whispering. "Did you see the way Lord Ilara trembled before the Sultan?" One whispered. "They say he crushes those who displease him." "I heard he feeds his enemies to the monstrous hounds in the dungeons," the other replied, her voice hushed with fear. Sadia's heart sank. These were not just idle rumors. They were deeply ingrained beliefs, fueled by the Sultan's masked presence and the whispers that circulated throughout the court. How could she reconcile the kind and thoughtful man she was beginning to know with the monster everyone else feared? That evening, as Idris sat with Sadia in their private chambers, she decided to address her concerns. "I heard whispers today," she said hesitantly, about your cruelty." Idris stiffened, his gaze hardening. "Whispers," he repeated, his voice cold. "They say you are a monster," Sadia continued, her voice barely above a whisper. Idris turned away, his masked face unreadable. "People fear what they do not understand," he said, his voice low. "But there are stories," Sadia pressed, "stories of villages raided, of people disappearing." Idris turned back to her. His eyes, visible through the slits in his mask, seemed to flash with anger. "These are troubled times," he said, his voice tight. "There are enemies both within and without our borders. I must protect my kingdom." "But at what cost?" Sadia asked, her voice rising. "Are you saying these stories are true?" Idris stood abruptly, his movements sharp and sudden. "I will not be questioned," he said, his voice laced with authority. "My methods are my own. I rule as I see fit." He turned and strode out of the chamber, leaving Sadia alone with her doubts. His evasiveness, his anger, planted a seed of unease in her heart. She had seen the fear in his people's eyes, heard the whispers of his cruelty. Could she truly trust the man behind the mask, even if he had shown her kindness and vulnerability? The mystery surrounding Idris deepened, casting a shadow over the fragile bond that had begun to form between them. The scent of jasmine hung heavy in the air as Sadia and Idris walked through the palace gardens. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the winding paths. They found a secluded alcove, hidden behind a curtain of fragrant wisteria. Idris removed his mask, the familiar scar stark against his skin in the fading light. "I sometimes think these gardens are a reflection of my life," Idris said, his voice quiet. Beautiful on the surface, but full of hidden dangers. Sadia nodded, remembering the poisonous plants she had seen. It is hard to know what is real and what is not, she replied. Idris sighed. Indeed, it is the same with my reputation. The stories they tell, they paint me as a monster. But that is not who I am. He picked up a fallen jasmine blossom and turned it over in his fingers. I want to change things, Sadia. I want to rule with justice and compassion. But the mask, it has become a prison. The people expect a certain ruthlessness from their masked sultan. If I show weakness, if I show kindness, they will see it as a vulnerability, an opportunity to exploit. Sadia looked at him, seeing the weariness in his eyes. But surely there must be a way, she said softly. A way to show them the truth. Idris shook his head. I have tried. Small acts of kindness, gestures of goodwill. They are interpreted as tricks, as manipulations. The mask has become a barrier not just between me and my people, but between me and myself. He looked at Sadia, his gaze searching. You see me, Sadia. You see the man behind the mask. But I fear no one else ever will. Sadia placed her hand on his arm. Perhaps not yet, she said, her voice gentle. But perhaps with time you can show them, you can prove to them that you are not the monster they believe you to be. Idris looked at her, a flicker of hope in his eyes. He took her hand in his grip warm and reassuring. I hope you are right, Sadia, he said, for your sake and for the sake of my people. They sat in silence for a while, the only sound the gentle splashing of the fountain nearby. The setting sun painted the sky in hues of orange and purple, casting a warm glow over the gardens. In that moment, surrounded by the beauty and the quiet, Sadia felt a connection to Idris, a sense of shared vulnerability and understanding. His confession, his desire to change, touched her heart, but even as their bond deepened, a nagging doubt remained. She had seen the fear in the eyes of his courtiers, heard the whispers of his cruelty. Could she truly believe his words? Or were they just another deception, another layer of the mask he wore? The mystery surrounding Idris remained, a shadow lurking beneath the surface of their growing connection. She wanted to believe him, she wanted to trust him, but the whispers of the monster still echoed in her ears. General Marwan surveyed the training grounds, his eyes cold and calculating. The soldiers, clad in gleaming armor, moved with precision and discipline, their every movement a testament to his rigorous training. He was a man of iron will, a seasoned warrior who had risen through the ranks to become the Sultan's most trusted commander. His authority was absolute, his word law within the ranks of the army. He watched as a young recruit stumbled during a sword drill. Marwan's face remained impassive, but a flicker of displeasure crossed his eyes. Again, he barked, his voice sharp and commanding. The recruit, his face pale with fear, scrambled to his feet and repeated the drill, his movements now jerky and uncertain. Marwan believed in strength, in unwavering loyalty, and in the power of fear. He had cultivated the image of the masked Sultan as a monster, a creature of darkness who demanded unquestioning obedience. This fear, he knew, was the key to his control, the foundation upon which his power rested. He had seen the Sultan's new bride, Sadia, walking in the gardens, with Idris, their heads close together in conversation. He had observed their interactions, the easy smiles, the shared laughter. A flicker of suspicion sparked in his eyes. This mountain girl, with her gentle ways and her quiet strength, was a threat. She was softening the Sultan, whispering doubts into his ear, chipping away at the carefully constructed image of the monster he had so meticulously crafted. That evening, Marwan summoned his most loyal captains. They met in a dimly lit chamber deep within the palace, the air thick with the scent of incense and the weight of secrets. "The Sultan's new bride is a danger to us all," Marwan said, his voice low and menacing. "She seeks to weaken the Sultan, to undermine his authority." "What do you propose, General?" one of the captains asked. "We must reinforce the narrative," Marwan replied, his eyes glinting in the candlelight. "The stories of the monster, the tales of his cruelty, they must be amplified, spread throughout the kingdom, whispered in every ear." He looked at each of his captains, his gaze unwavering. "The people must fear the Sultan. They must believe he is capable of anything. Only then can we maintain control." The captains nodded, their faces grim. They understood the game, the delicate balance of power that Marwan so skillfully manipulated. "We will ensure the stories reach the right ears, General," one of them said. Marwan smiled, a thin, cruel smile that did not reach his eyes. "Good," he said. "Let the whispers grow into roars. Let the fear consume them. Let the monster reign." He knew the Sultan's growing affection for Sadia was a weakness, a vulnerability he could exploit. He would not allow this mountain girl to dismantle the power he had so carefully built. He would use her, use the growing bond between her and Idris to further his own agenda, to strengthen his grip on the kingdom, and to ensure that the masked Sultan remained a figure of fear and dread. Sadia's unease grew with each passing day. Despite Idris's assurances, whispers of raided villages continued to reach her ears. A shepherd boy, seeking refuge in the palace gardens, spoke of soldiers bearing the Sultan's crimson and gold banners, descending upon his village, stealing livestock and grain. A merchant, his face etched with fear, told of his caravan being attacked, his goods confiscated by men wearing the Sultan's uniform. Sadia couldn't ignore these stories. They contradicted everything Idris had told her about wanting to rule with justice and compassion. She felt a growing sense of betrayal, a cold knot of fear tightening in her stomach. Was Idris lying to her? Was he truly the monster everyone believed him to be? She sought out Idris, finding him in his private study, poring over maps and documents. He looked up as she entered, his masked face unreadable. "Sadia," he greeted her, his voice even. "What brings you here?" "I need to speak with you," Sadia said, her voice trembling slightly. "About the raids." Idris stiffened. "The raids?" he repeated. "The villages," Sadia continued, her voice growing stronger. "They are still being raided, despite your promises." Idris rose from his chair, his movements sharp. "I told you," he said, his voice tight. "These are troubled times. I must maintain order, protect my kingdom." "By terrorizing your own people," Sadia challenged him, her anger flaring. "The shepherd boy, the merchant, they spoke of soldiers bearing your banner, wearing your uniform. These are lies," Idris insisted, his voice rising. "Fabrications spread by my enemies to undermine my authority." "Are they?" Sadia pressed, her eyes blazing. "Or are you the monster they say you are, hiding behind a mask of gold?" Idris flinched as if struck. "How dare you?" he said, his voice cold with fury. "I have shown you nothing but kindness, and you accuse me of such things." "You have shown me kindness," Sadia retorted, "but you have also shown me deception. You speak of justice, yet your soldiers terrorize innocent villagers. You speak of compassion, yet you hide behind a mask, allowing fear to rule your kingdom." Idris stood before her, his masked face a blank slate, his silence heavy with unspoken anger. Sadia turned and fled the room, her heart aching with disappointment and a growing sense of dread. Marwan, watching from the shadows, smug smile playing on his lips, saw the argument unfold. He had anticipated this conflict, had orchestrated it even. He knew Sadia's accusations would fuel the flames of doubt, further solidifying the image of the masked Sultan as a cruel and ruthless tyrant. He quickly spread the news of the argument. throughout the palace, twisting the story to his advantage. He painted Sadia as a troublemaker, a scheming outsider seeking to undermine the Sultan's authority. He hinted at her disloyalty, her supposed attempts to manipulate the Sultan for her own gain. The whispers spread like wildfire, reaching the ears of the courtiers, the servants, the guards. The fear of the masked Sultan, already deeply ingrained, intensified, now mingled with suspicion and resentment towards Sadia. She had become a scapegoat, a convenient target for the fear and anger that Marwan so skillfully manipulated. The people, once sympathetic to the mountain girl who had bravely offered herself as a bride, now turned against her, seeing her as a threat to their sultan, a danger to their kingdom. Marwan's plan began to unfold with subtle precision. He started by restricting Sadia's access to Idris, claiming it was for her own protection, given the growing unrest within the palace. He planted rumors that Sadia was plotting against the Sultan, whispering these lies to Idris's most trusted advisors. He forged documents, seemingly written by Sadia, that implied she was communicating with enemies of the kingdom. He then arranged for a series of accidents designed to frighten Sadia and make her appear unstable. A heavy tapestry accidentally fell from the wall just as she passed beneath it. A venomous snake was discovered in her chambers. Her meals were subtly tampered with, causing her to experience bouts of dizziness and nausea. These incidents, though seemingly minor, created an atmosphere of fear and paranoia around Sadia. The courtiers, already wary of her, began to avoid her, their whispers growing louder, their glances filled with suspicion. Even the servants, once friendly and helpful, now treated her with a mixture of fear and distrust. Sadia, feeling increasingly isolated and vulnerable, confided in a young palace servant named Zara, who had shown her kindness in the past. "I fear for my life, Zara," she said, her voice trembling. "Someone is trying to harm me." Zara, her face pale with concern, nodded. "I have heard the whispers, my lady," she said. They say you are a threat to the Sultan." "It's a lie," Sadia insisted. "Someone is setting me up." Zara looked around, nervously, then lowered her voice. "I believe you, my lady," she whispered, "but you must be careful. There are powerful forces at work in this palace." Marwan, meanwhile, was preparing the final stage of his plan. He chose a dark, moonless night for the assassination attempt. He instructed one of his most loyal assassins to attack Sadia in her chambers, making it appear as if the masked Sultan himself had ordered the deed. As Sadia lay in her bed, trying to ignore the growing sense of dread that filled her, she heard a faint scratching at her window. She rose cautiously, her heart pounding in her chest. As she approached the window, a dark figure lunged through the open pane, a dagger flashing in his hand. Sadia screamed and instinctively recoiled, the assassin's blade narrowly missing her. She stumbled backward, knocking over a table, the crash echoing through the silent chamber. The assassin lunged again, but Sadia, fueled by adrenaline and fear, managed to dodge his attack. The palace guards, alerted by the commotion, burst into the room. The assassin, his face hidden by a black hood, turned to flee, but the guards quickly apprehended him. As they dragged him away, his hood fell back, revealing his face. It was a face Sadia had seen before, one of Marwan's most trusted lieutenants. The guards, their faces grim, looked at Sadia with a mixture of suspicion and concern. "Are you all right, my lady?" one of them asked. Sadia, still trembling from the attack, could only nod. She knew this was just the beginning. Marwan's plan had been set in motion, and she was now caught in its deadly web. She had to find a way to prove her innocence, to expose Marwan's treachery, and to clear the name of the man she was beginning to believe was not a monster after all. Sadia knew she could not remain passive. The attempt on her life had shaken her deeply, but it also solidified her resolve. She would not be a victim. She would fight back. She would uncover the truth, no matter the cost. Zara, the young palace servant, became Sadia's confidant and ally. Zara, though fearful, was fiercely loyal to Sadia, recognizing her inherent goodness and sensing the injustice surrounding her. Together, they began a clandestine investigation, working in secret under the cover of darkness. Sadia knew the key to exposing the truth lay in understanding the raids. She questioned Zara carefully, probing for any information, any detail that might shed light on the attacks. "The soldiers who conduct these raids," Sadia asked, her voice low, "are they all loyal to the Sultan?" Zara hesitated, her eyes darting nervously around the room. "Most are," she replied, her voice barely a whisper, "but there are some who follow General Marwan. They are the ones who carry out the most brutal acts." Sadia's suspicions about Marwan deepened. "Tell me more about Marwan," she urged. "What kind of man is he?" "He is ruthless," Zara said, her voice trembling slightly. "He inspires fear in everyone, even the other generals. He controls the army with an iron fist." "And the Sultan?" Sadia asked. "Does he know about Marwan's methods?" Zara shook her head. "I don't know, my lady. The general is very careful. He keeps his activities hidden, operating in the shadows." Sadia pressed further. "Have you noticed anything unusual? Any patterns to the raids?" Zara thought for a moment, her brow furrowed, in concentration. "The raided villages," she finally said, "they all lie along the trade routes leading to the neighboring kingdoms." "Trade routes?" Sadia repeated, a thought beginning to form in her mind. "Yes, my lady," Zara confirmed. "And the goods seized during the raids. They never reach the palace treasury. They simply disappear." Sadia's mind raced. Stolen goods, disappearing along trade routes. It all pointed to a larger scheme, a web of deceit far more complex than she had initially imagined. She suspected Marwan was not just terrorizing villages, he was profiting from their misery. Zara, seeing the look of determination on Sadia's face, offered her assistance. "I can help you, my lady," she said. "I know the palace like the back of my hand. I can access areas others cannot. I can gather information, listen to conversations." Sadia looked at Zara, grateful for her loyalty and courage. "Thank you, Zara," she said. "Your help will be invaluable." Together, they devised a plan. Zara would use her position within the palace to gather information about Marwan's activities. She would listen at keyholes, intercept messages, and observe the movements of Marwan and his loyalists. Sadia, meanwhile, would focus on finding concrete evidence to support their suspicions. She knew she was treading a dangerous path, but she was determined to uncover the truth, even if it meant risking her own life. The fate of her village, and perhaps even the entire kingdom, rested on her success. Following Zara's information, Sadia focused her search on Marwan's private chambers. She knew it was a dangerous undertaking. Marwan's rooms were heavily guarded, and any unauthorized entry would be met with swift and brutal consequences. But Sadia was undeterred. She had to find proof, something tangible to expose Marwan's treachery. Zara, using her knowledge of the palace's hidden passages, managed to procure a key to a small, unused storage room adjacent to Marwan's chambers. The room, dusty and filled with discarded furniture, offered a secret access point, a hidden door concealed behind a heavy tapestry. Late one night, while the palace slept, Sadia and Zara slipped into the storage room. Their hearts pounded in their chests as Zara carefully unlocked the hidden door. They entered Marwan's chambers, the air thick with the scent of sandalwood and something else, something faintly metallic, that made Sadia uneasy. Moonlight streamed through the arched windows, illuminating the opulent furnishings and rich tapestries. Sadia moved cautiously, her eyes scanning the room, searching for anything out of place. She noticed a heavy wooden chest tucked away in a darkened alcove. It was locked, secured with a thick iron padlock. Zara produced a small set of lock and picks, her nimble fingers working quickly and silently. With a soft click, the lock sprang open. Sadia lifted the heavy lid, her heart pounding with anticipation. Inside, nestled among layers of silk cloth, lay a thick, leather-bound ledger. Sadia carefully lifted it out, her hands trembling slightly. She opened the book, her eyes scanning the neatly written entries. As she read, her blood ran cold. The ledger detailed a series of transactions, secret deals made with enemy kingdoms, shipments of weapons, deliveries of gold, exchange of strategic information, all meticulously recorded, all bearing Marwan's signature. And beside each entry, a single chilling note, by order of the masked Sultan. Sadia's breath caught in her throat. It was all there, laid out in black and white. Marwan's treachery, his web of deceit, his manipulation of the Sultan's image to cover his own criminal activities. He had been using the monster narrative, the fear of the masked Sultan, to justify his own greed and ambition. Sadia realized the extent of his deception. Marwan hadn't just been profiting from the raids, he had been actively orchestrating them, blaming the masked Sultan for the atrocities, solidifying the image of a cruel and heartless ruler, all while lining his own pockets and weakening the kingdom from within. She closed the ledger, her mind reeling from the implications of her discovery. This was more than just evidence of corruption, it was treason. Marwan was not just a ruthless general, he was a traitor, a viper in the Sultan's inner circle, and Idris, masked and isolated, was completely unaware of the betrayal happening right under his nose. Sadia looked at Zara, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and determination. "We have to show this to Idris," she said, her voice firm. "He needs to know the truth." Zara nodded, her face pale but resolute. "We will, my lady," she said. "We will expose him, no matter the cost." They carefully closed the chest and replaced the lock, leaving everything as they had found it. They slipped back through the hidden door, their hearts pounding with the weight of the secret they now carried. They knew they were playing a dangerous game, but they were committed to seeing it through. The truth had to be revealed, even if it meant facing the wrath of the most powerful man in the kingdom. Sadia knew that confronting Marwan alone would be reckless. He was too powerful, his influence too deeply entrenched within the court. She needed allies, people who shared her suspicions, people who were willing to risk everything to expose the truth. She began cautiously, reaching out to those she sensed might be sympathetic to her cause. She started with Zara, whose loyalty and discretion she had come to trust implicitly. Zara, in turn, introduced Sadia to a small circle of disillusioned courtiers and palace staff. Among them was Hakim, the Sultan's elderly advisor, a wise and observant man who had served Idris's father before him. He had witnessed Marwan's rise to power, had seen the subtle shifts in the court, the growing fear, the increasing isolation of the Sultan. He suspected Marwan's treachery, but had lacked the evidence to prove it. There was also Amira, a lady-in-waiting, whose family had suffered at the hands of Marwan's soldiers. She had seen her village raided, her family's livelihood destroyed, all under the guise of the masked Sultan's authority. She harbored a deep resentment towards Marwan and a burning desire for justice. And then there was Omar, the captain of the palace guard, a man of honor and integrity who had grown increasingly uneasy with Marwan's methods and the growing unrest within the kingdom. He had witnessed the fear in the eyes of the people, the whispers of discontent, and he knew something was amiss. Sadia shared her discovery with this small, trusted group, showing them the ledger, revealing Marwan's secret dealings and his manipulation of the Sultan. The evidence, stark and undeniable, confirmed their suspicions. They were united in their outrage, their determination to expose Marwan and bring him to justice. They met in secret, in hidden chambers and secluded corners of the palace gardens, their conversations hushed, their movements cautious. They gathered information, sharing what they had learned, piecing together the puzzle of Marwan's treachery. Hakim, with his vast knowledge of the court and its inner workings, provided valuable insights into Marwan's network of informants and allies. He identified key individuals who could be persuaded to testify against Marwan, people who had witnessed his illegal activities or had been victims of his schemes. Amira, using her position within the inner circle of the court, gathered information about Marwan's movements, his meetings, his communications. She intercepted messages, listened at keyholes, and observed his interactions with other courtiers, gleaning valuable intelligence about his plans and intentions. Omar, with his control over the palace guard, ensured their meetings remained secret and provided protection for Sadia and the others. He also began to subtly shift the loyalties of some of the guards, sowing seeds of doubt about Marwan's leadership and his true allegiance to the Sultan. Sadia, the driving force behind the alliance, coordinated their efforts, ensuring their information was accurate and their plan well executed. She knew the risks were high, but she was determined to see Marwan brought down, to clear the Sultan's name, and to bring peace and justice back to the kingdom. They planned their next move carefully, knowing that their confrontation with Marwan would have to be timed perfectly, executed flawlessly, to ensure their success and their survival. They were preparing for a battle for the soul of the kingdom, a battle against a powerful and ruthless enemy who would stop at nothing to maintain his grip on power. Idris paced the length of his private study, the golden mask resting on the table beside him. He felt a growing unease, a sense of disconnection from his own kingdom. The whispers of his cruelty had intensified, the fear in the eyes of his courtiers more palpable than ever. He felt trapped, isolated by the very mask he had once believed would protect him. Marwan, sensing Idris's vulnerability, had become a constant presence at his side, offering counsel, whispering reassurances, subtly reinforcing the narrative of the masked sultan's power and ruthlessness. He spoke of conspiracies and threats, of enemies lurking in every shadow, feeding Idris's paranoia and deepening his sense of isolation. "The people need a strong hand, Your Majesty," Marwan would say, his voice smooth and persuasive. "They need to know you will not tolerate dissent, that you will crush those who challenge your authority." Idris, weary of the whispers and the fear, found himself relying more and more on Marwan's advice. He began to implement harsher laws, stricter punishments, all in the name of maintaining order and protecting his kingdom. He withdrew further into himself, rarely appearing in public without his mask, his interactions with his court becoming increasingly formal and distant. Sadia watched this transformation with growing alarm. She knew Idris was being manipulated, that Marwan was poisoning his mind, twisting his good intentions into acts of cruelty. She held the proof, the ledger detailing Marwan's treachery, but she hesitated to reveal it. She feared the consequences, not just for herself, but for Idris. The revelation of Marwan's betrayal, of his manipulation of the Sultan's image, could shatter Idris's authority, undermine his legitimacy, and plunge the kingdom into chaos. She confided in Zara, her voice filled with anguish. "I don't know what to do, Zara," she said. "I have the proof, but I fear revealing it will destroy Idris." Zara, her face etched with concern, nodded. "It is a delicate situation, my lady," she said. "The people believe in the monster. If they learn the truth, they may not accept it. They may see Idris as weak, as easily manipulated." Sadia paced the length of her chamber, her mind racing. She had to find a way to expose Marwan without destroying Idris. She had to reveal the truth without shattering the fragile peace of the kingdom. She thought of her village, of the people she had sworn to protect, their fate, and the fate of the entire kingdom now rested on her shoulders. She considered confronting Idris directly, showing him the ledger, but she feared his reaction. He had grown increasingly reliant on Marwan, increasingly isolated from the rest of the court. Would he believe her? Or would he dismiss her accusations as the ravings of a jealous wife, a scheming outsider seeking to undermine his authority? She thought of presenting the evidence to the Council of Elders, but she knew Marwan's influence extended even there. He had carefully placed his loyalists in key positions, ensuring his control over the levers of power. They would likely discredit her, dismiss her evidence, and perhaps even turn against her. Sadia felt trapped, caught between her desire to expose the truth and her fear of the consequences. The weight of her responsibility pressed down on her, threatening to crush her beneath its burden. She knew she had to act, but she also knew she had to act carefully. One wrong move could destroy everything she had been working for, everything she held dear. The annual harvest festival was a time of celebration in Gazara. The palace courtyard, usually a place of hushed whispers and formal processions, was transformed into a vibrant tapestry of color and music. Courtiers, dressed in their finest attire, mingled with merchants and commoners, their laughter echoing through the air. Tables laden with food and drink lined the courtyard walls, and the aroma of roasted meats and spiced wines filled the air. Idris, masked as always, sat upon his throne, observing the festivities with a detached air. Marwan stood at his side, a smug smile playing on his lips. He had orchestrated this event, using it as an opportunity to further solidify the image of the masked sultan's power and benevolence. Sadia watched from the sidelines, her heart pounding in her chest. This was it. This was her chance. She had carefully planned her move, coordinating with Hakim, Amira, and Omar. They were in position, ready to act when she gave the signal. Taking a deep breath, Sadia stepped forward, her voice ringing out clear and strong above the din of the festival. "General Marwan," she called out, her gaze unwavering, "I have something I wish to share with you, and with the Sultan." All eyes turned towards Sadia, the music and laughter fading into a hushed silence. Marwan, his smile faltering, turned to face her, his eyes narrowed with suspicion. "What is the meaning of this interruption?" he demanded, his voice laced with authority. Sadia held up the leather-bound ledger, its pages rustling in the breeze. "This," she said, her voice ringing with conviction, "is the meaning of this interruption." Marwan's face paled, his eyes widening in disbelief. He recognized the ledger instantly, the book that contained the damning evidence of his treachery. "Where did you get that?" he demanded, his voice tight with anger. "It doesn't matter where I got it," Sadia replied, her gaze unwavering. "What matters is what it contains." She opened the ledger, her voice rising so that everyone in the courtyard could hear. "It contains a detailed record of your secret dealings with our enemies, your betrayal of the Sultan, your theft from the kingdom's coffers." A murmur rippled through the crowd, the whispers growing louder, the air thick with disbelief and outrage. Marwan, struggling to regain control of the situation, stepped forward, his voice laced with contempt. "These are lies," he declared, his gaze sweeping across the assembled crowd. "Fabrications concocted by a jealous wife, a scheming outsider seeking to undermine the Sultan's authority." He turned to Idris, his voice dripping with false concern. "Your Majesty, do not listen to her. She seeks to destroy you, to tear down everything you have built." Before Idris could respond, Sadia stepped forward again, her voice ringing with defiance. "If these are lies," she challenged Marwan, Then explain these entries. Explain the shipments of weapons to our enemies. Explain the transfer of gold to secret accounts. Explain the exchange of strategic information that has cost the lives of our soldiers." She paused, then added, her voice filled with emotion. "Explain the raids on innocent villages, the theft of their livelihoods, all conducted under the guise of the masked Sultan's authority, all for your own personal gain." Hakim, Amira, and Omar stepped forward, joining Sadia. Hakim, his voice trembling with age but firm with conviction, addressed the crowd. "I have witnessed General Marwan's treachery firsthand," he declared. "I have seen his manipulation of the Sultan, his abuse of power, his disregard for the well-being of the kingdom." Amira, her voice filled with passion, spoke of the suffering of her village, of the devastation wrought by Marwan's soldiers. "He has used the Sultan's name to justify his own cruelty," she cried, her voice ringing with anguish. "He has brought shame and dishonor upon this kingdom." Omar, his hand resting on the hilt of his sword, addressed the assembled guards. "We have sworn an oath to protect the Sultan, to serve the kingdom," he declared, his voice ringing with authority. "But we have been misled, manipulated by a traitor who hides behind a mask of loyalty." He turned to Marwan, his gaze unwavering. "Your treachery ends here, General." The crowd erupted in a cacophony of shouts and murmurs, their fear and confusion giving way to anger and outrage. They had believed the stories of the masked Sultan's cruelty, but now they saw the truth, the web of lies that Marwan had so carefully woven. Marwan, his face pale and contorted with rage, stood alone, his carefully constructed facade crumbling around him. He had underestimated Sadia, her courage, her resourcefulness, and her unwavering determination to uncover the truth. He had underestimated the power of truth itself, the power of justice, the power of a united people rising up against tyranny. Idris sat frozen on his throne, the golden mask feeling heavier than ever. He watched the scene unfold before him, the accusations, the evidence, the rising tide of anger directed at Marwan. He had heard whispers of Marwan's ruthlessness, of his iron grip on the army, but he had dismissed them as the inevitable grumblings of a court always eager to find fault. He had trusted Marwan, relied on him, believed in his loyalty. Now, as he listened to Sadia's words, as he saw the damning evidence laid bare for all to see, a cold dread settled in his stomach. Could it be true? Could the man he had trusted, the man he had relied upon, be a traitor? He looked at Sadia, her face pale but resolute, her eyes blazing with a fierce determination. He saw the fear in her eyes, but also the unwavering conviction, the unwavering belief in the truth. He had seen that same look before, years ago, in the eyes of his father. Just before, a searing pain shot through his temple, a phantom echo of the fire that had scarred him, the fire that had nearly claimed his life. The memory, long suppressed, flooded back, vivid and terrifying. The chaos, the screams, the flames engulfing the palace. And Marwan, his face illuminated by the firelight, a look of triumph in his eyes. He had dismissed it then, attributed it to the delirium of his injuries, the trauma of the event. But now, as he looked at Marwan, his face contorted with rage and desperation. The pieces clicked into place. The fire, the coup attempt, the whispers of his cruelty, the raids on the villages. It was all connected, all orchestrated by the man he had trusted most. Marwan had used the chaos of the fire, the uncertainty of the succession, to seize power, to consolidate his control over the army, to manipulate the court. He had created the myth of the monster, the masked sultan, to justify his own brutality, to conceal his own treachery. He had used Idris, scarred and vulnerable, as a puppet, a figurehead to hide behind while he plundered the kingdom and enriched himself. This Realization hit Idris with the force of a physical blow. He felt a wave of nausea, a sense of betrayal so profound it threatened to shatter him. He had been a fool, blinded by his own pain, his own isolation. He had allowed himself to be manipulated, used, by the very man he had believed was his protector. He reached up, his hand trembling, and slowly removed the golden mask. He revealed his face, the scar a stark reminder of Marwan's betrayal, a testament to the darkness that had festered within his own court. He looked at his people, there, faces a mixture of shock and disbelief. He saw the fear in their eyes, the fear he himself had cultivated, the fear that Marwan had so skillfully exploited. "The stories you have heard," he said, his voice hoarse with emotion. "The stories of the monster. They are not entirely false, but the monster is not who you think it is." He turned to Marwan, his gaze burning with a cold fury. "You," he said, his voice ringing with authority, "are the monster." The courtyard fell silent. Every eye was fixed on Idris, his face, usually hidden behind the golden mask, now exposed for all to see. The single scar that marred his otherwise handsome features seemed to burn brighter in the torchlight, a testament to the betrayal he had suffered. "Marwan," Idris said, his voice resonating with newfound strength, "you have betrayed my trust, abused your power, and brought shame upon this kingdom. You have used my name, my image, to justify your own greed and ambition. You have terrorized my people, stolen their livelihoods, and weakened this kingdom from within." He paused, his gaze sweeping across the assembled crowd, the raids on the villages, the disappearances, the whispers of cruelty. They were all orchestrated by this man, this traitor who stands before you. He pointed a steady finger at Marwan, who stood frozen, his face ashen, the smug smile replaced by a look of utter defeat. "Omar," Idris commanded, his voice ringing with authority. "Arrest General Marwan for treason." Omar, the captain of the palace guard, stepped forward, his face grim. He placed a hand on Marwan's shoulder. "General Marwan," he said, his voice cold and formal, "you are under arrest." Marwan offered no resistance as the guards led him away, his head bowed, his reign of terror finally at an end. The crowd erupted in cheers, their fear giving way to relief, their anger replaced by a newfound hope. They had witnessed the unmasking of their Sultan, both literally and figuratively. They had seen the man behind the mask, the man who had been betrayed, the man who now stood before them, ready to reclaim his kingdom. Idris turned to Sadia, his eyes filled with gratitude and respect. "You have saved me, Sadia," he said, his voice soft with emotion. "You have saved my kingdom." Sadia met his gaze, her heart swelling with pride and relief. "We did it together," she said, her voice steady. Idris addressed the crowd once more, his voice ringing with newfound confidence. "The reign of fear is over," he declared. "I will rule with justice and compassion. I will rebuild what has been broken, restore what has been stolen. I will earn your trust, not through fear, but through transparency and accountability." He announced a series of reforms, beginning with the restructuring of the army. He appointed Omar as the new general, a man of integrity and unwavering loyalty to the kingdom. He established a council of advisors, comprised of trusted individuals from all walks of life, to ensure that all voices were heard and all perspectives considered. With Sadia's help, Idris began the arduous task of compensating the villages that had been raided. He ordered the return of stolen goods, provided funds for rebuilding, and implemented measures to ensure their safety and prosperity. He traveled to the affected villages himself, meeting with the people, listening to their stories, offering his apologies and his commitment to making amends. He visited Sadia's village in the Whispering Mountains. His arrival met with cautious curiosity rather than fear. He spoke to the villagers, not as a masked sultan, but as a man, acknowledging the harm that had been done, promising to rebuild their trust. He saw the pride in Sadia's eyes as she introduced him to her people, the people she had so bravely defended, the people she had risked everything to save. The transformation in Idris was remarkable. He had shed the mask, both literally and metaphorically. He had embraced vulnerability, acknowledged his mistakes, and committed himself to a new way of ruling. He was no longer the isolated, masked figure shrouded in fear and mystery. He was a leader, a true sultan, ready to lead his people towards a brighter future. The weeks that followed Marwan's arrest were a time of healing and rebuilding. Idris, his face now unveiled, moved among his people, listening to their concerns, addressing their grievances. He held public audiences, dispensing justice fairly and openly. He reformed the tax system, easing the burden on the poorest of his subjects. He invested in infrastructure, building roads and bridges, connecting the far-flung corners of his kingdom. The people, seeing Idris's true face, his genuine remorse for the injustices committed in his name, began to shed their fear. They saw not a monster, but a man, a ruler who cared for his people, who was committed to their well-being. The whispers of cruelty faded, replaced by expressions of respect and admiration. Sadia stood by Idris's side, her counsel invaluable. She reminded him of the importance of listening to his people, of understanding their needs, of ruling with compassion and wisdom. She shared her knowledge of the mountain villages, their customs and their struggles, helping Idris bridge the divide between the palace and the people. Their bond, forged in adversity, deepened into a love built on mutual respect and shared purpose. They worked together tirelessly to heal the wounds of the past, to rebuild trust, to create a kingdom where justice and prosperity reigned. One evening, as the sun set over Gazara, casting a warm golden glow over the palace gardens, Idris and Sadia walked hand in hand. The gardens, once a place of hidden dangers and whispered secrets, now felt like a sanctuary, a place of peace and tranquility. They stopped by the fountain, its gentle splashing a soothing melody in the quiet evening air. Idris turned to Sadia, his eyes filled with love and admiration. "I never thought I would find happiness," he said, his voice soft with emotion. "I had resigned myself to a life of loneliness, hidden behind a mask, feared by my own people." Sadia smiled, her hand reaching up to gently touch his cheek, tracing the line of the scar that had once been a symbol of his pain, now a mark of his resilience. "You are not alone anymore," she said, her voice gentle. "We are in this together." Idris took her hand in his grip warm and reassuring. "You have shown me the true meaning of leadership, Sadia," he said. "You have taught me that true strength lies not in fear, but in compassion, not in isolation, but in connection." He leaned down and kissed her, a kiss that sealed their love, a kiss that symbolized the healing of their kingdom, the promise of a brighter future. News arrived from the Whispering Mountains. Sadia's village, once struggling to survive, was now thriving. The fields were green, the flocks were plentiful, and the people, no longer living in fear, were rebuilding their homes, their lives, their future. Sadia's heart swelled with joy. She had fulfilled her promise, not just to her village, but to herself. She had faced the monster, not with a sword, but with courage and compassion, and in doing so she had not only saved her people, but she had also found love, a love that had transformed a masked sultan into a true leader, a love that had healed a kingdom and brought hope to a land shrouded in darkness. As they stood together, hand in hand, watching the sun dip below the horizon, Sadia and Idris knew that their journey had just begun. They had a kingdom to rebuild, a future to create together.